So I'm Donna Hall. I was a chief exec at Wigan Council for about 10 years. I now chair Bolton NHS Foundation Trust, and also a charity called Possibilities, which is to support people with learning disabilities towards an equal life. I also chair a think tank called New Local, which is about getting communities involved in transforming local areas. So really difficult, challenging question. Do you want me to answer all of them, Isaac, all at once? Yeah, okay. So I think the challenges, we all know from our own experience, or most of us probably do, that it's just fractured, it's broken into little bits. And it's based on a very kind of social care, I think, is based on a very medicalised model rather than a social and a human model. And also we don't work together to support people and wrap support and help with around people. We just do our own little bit. So I know at the NHS Foundation Trust that I chair, a lot of our things that go wrong are to do with things that might have happened in primary care or might have happened in social care, and yet we don't work well together across the system. And we report to, so that the things that's the biggest challenge is I think we are very centralised as a country, and the NHS is amazing, but it's very command and control. It's not based on listening to the voices of people with lived experience like yourself and Anna and others who can help to redesign services. That's what the biggest challenge is. It's hierarchical, it's top down. It assumes it knows what's best for people without really listening to people. And I think we heard from Jane in a brilliant video, didn't we, earlier on today, that empathetic listening is the key to good support and to help people to live an equal life. So I think that's the biggest challenge. The problems and the gaps are, we think we know what's best for people as professionals without really asking them, and that's key to it all. Opportunities, I think there are so many. So when I was at Wigan, we did this thing called the Wigan Deal, which was about every citizen, all 323,000 of them, having an equal life, being listened to, being treated with respect. Whoever the public servant was or community person it was who was working with them, they would get that same level of dignity and respect. I know it sounds a daft thing to have to do with public servants, but we train them how to listen properly. And you'd think everyone knows how to listen. It's a very basic thing, but not everyone does listen. They put people into little boxes of need, and they kind of hide a bit behind the clipboard. So we didn't want that to happen. We wanted people to really connect human to human with public servants and people who drew on social care and people who had access to any kind of service from the council, children's social care as well. So I think there are opportunities to think differently, but it takes a lot of courage and determination from people who manage public services on the ground in places, particularly social care. I do think there's some real innovation happening. We've got some people in this meeting who are leading some amazing change within their organisations and within their places. So there are some little spark plugs of great stuff happening. But I think the problem is that we've not got a clear plan for social care. And those 5 asks that Social Care Futures that yourself, Isaac, and Anna and others came up with are just exactly right, I think. And we just need to get, the opportunity is we need to get politicians at the national level and at the local level to listen to what you said, and to put more money in, I'll be honest as well. I think one of the issues is there's something that came out from the King's Fund this morning saying that we need an additional 7.9 billion a year to properly fund social care. It's always been seen as the Cinderella service to the NHS, and that's not right. It really isn't right. I mean, from my personal experience with my own mum and with my partner's mum and dad, going through horrific experience of just the navigating of the complexity of it. We've got to make it simple and easy to access. We've got to get staff to listen. We've got to get leaders to listen. And we've got to see social care as, it's a part of life that we will all we will all draw on social care at some point, and that's, I think people are othered and put into categories. We find that with people with learning disabilities and autism in impossibilities, they just get seen as, let's send them to a day centre, get them out of the way kind of thing. So we've just built some new flats for people with learning disabilities, and the change in their life has been incredible. So one young man, Tom, who's 19, his only friend was his dad. He didn't have any friendship or any social connection with anyone. He's now got a group of friends of the people who've moved into the flats with him, and a girlfriend, and his life is completely transformed. So sometimes it's not about services, it's about helping people with social connection.
Really great to be here. So I take very literally my brief to be a listener. So I was thinking about what did I hear this morning, and the first thing I was struck with was that home seems to have some practical dimensions. So there was the talk about safety, there was the talk about privacy, there was the phrase, it's a place that's set up for me. So that's a pretty practical, physical thing about the space. But home is also very clearly about emotions and feelings. And there was a lot more talk about it's meals made with love. It's about love and dreams. It's about being happy. It's about fun. It's about connection. And I think one of the first challenges that we've got when we think about social care is the social care system, if we label it as a system, it tends to be a bit better with the practical stuff. It tends to be happy with that. I think you said, Isaac, about, it's task focus. But it's not so comfortable with talking about emotions. It's not so comfortable talking about love. It's not so comfortable talking about life. And that is going to be our perennial challenge, because that first set of stuff is much more measurable. Is this stuff in place? Have we provided this? Is X there? Whether you feel happy or loved or warmth or safe is a very different emotion. And I think that things are quite difficult there. So I think there's a real challenge for us to think about those. I think the second challenge, and is to pick up Daphne's point from earlier, is that if we get it wrong, if we don't support people, then the very place that should be the most safe, the most warm, the most special, can feel the complete opposite of that. And that's a really horrible place to be, to feel like your home is a prison, as Daphne phrased it, to feel that your home is not somewhere that you feel all of those things, means that you're in a place of real vulnerability, and it's not good. So this isn't a nice, soft, gentle conversation. This is fundamental about whether or not we get this, if we get this wrong. I think the third challenge, and I'm Chief Executive with Age UK Gloucestershire. So we're a charity that tries to promote better later life. And we've set our vision as being trying to make Gloucestershire the best county in which to grow older. And one of the things that we see all the time, which blows my mind, is that people encounter all the time the challenges as they get older, that their home needs to change and needs to adapt and isn't fit for purpose. And what blows my mind is we're somehow surprised that people's needs change. We know they do. We know that life will shift and change in lots of different ways. And yet we continue to have a society and a system that ignores the fact that aging happens. And so we build houses physically that aren't in a good place for people to age and change in. They are great if you're the archetypal young family with children and a few people living in that house, and it's all great. And the expectation is you'll move out of that at some point in the future into another and a bigger house, and at some point you'll have to move out of that into a bungalow probably, or a retirement community. But that's not the way people really want to live. There were some fascinating conversations in the chat about people that have lived in the same home for 80, 90 years. Actually, home, if, as Martin said in his video, if home is about stepping out the door and being able to walk to the cafe and people know you, then why should leaving the place that you know and you are supported be the expectation? And I think it's primarily the expectation, not because people want to move or do that, but because they feel they have to, that they feel that the physical place that they're growing older in doesn't work for them anymore, and they've got to move. So I think there's definitely a requirement for homes, and the way that we set up homes and housing as a whole should think about the whole life course far more than it does. We should have an age-friendly standard in housing that says not only is this going to be good for you when you're younger, but as your needs change, there is space for you to evolve and to adapt. I also think that one of the ways that people tend to adapt to their homes at the moment are some very practical things that you can put in. You can put grab rails in, you can change the layout of your home. That's great. But that tends to happen in a crisis at the moment. That tends to happen when it's really late and you're struggling. It tends to happen when you're not prepared for it. We've got to, as Donna was just saying, we've got to get much more upstream in terms of providing the information and advice to people to prepare and to adapt, not to have to react and to respond. We know these things are happening and they become much easier to accept and embrace and to learn if we move through it gradually, rather than saying, I'm absolutely at the end of my tether, I can't cope anymore. And the first thing you want me to do is learn new stuff or have a whole load of upheaval in my lives. We've got to be much more forward thinking and prepared. And there's been some discussion about technology. And I think technology can be really helpful here. And I think it will become more and more helpful. But social care, if we think about it being those emotional things and about relationships and life, is fundamentally a people thing. So the tech can be everything, but if you don't know how to use that tech, then it's not helpful. So we still are going to need people to help people understand their lives, their spaces, and the facilities and the resources that they may have available to support them. So overall, the challenge, I think, is embracing that lives are complicated and messy, embracing that a good life involves love and emotion and feeling, and working out how to adapt the practical things in a really positive, constructive way, rather than seeing it as something that can rush in at the end and happen to people. That's never going to make things feel better in my eyes.
Thank you. I think the biggest challenge is loneliness. And it's really interesting that the central image in the Mentimeter was love, but actually most older people are older women living by themselves, who don't live in families. And I think that creates a particular context for us to be paying attention to. So my experience is I'm a carer for my mum, Daphne. I'm amazed we've got the same second name, but I'm an unpaid carer for my mum. And I've also set up a home care organisation because I wanted to see if I could be part of demonstrating a different way of working. So I've both seen it from being a registered manager of a home care organisation and an unpaid carer for my mum, who receives home care 3 times a day and needs quite a lot of support from her family too. So I think the biggest challenge is loneliness. I think this, and we know that this is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We know it has an amazingly significant effect on both health and well-being, and is just, frankly, miserable, really, really miserable. Not to have a purpose for getting up in the morning and not to think you're going to see anybody either. So for me, that's the biggest challenge, is people living by themselves and not seeing anybody. I think the second challenge is the same as Donna, is the fact that we are organised in silos. So when we're working in wellbeing teams, we were supporting a man called John, and we turn up in the morning to support John with his medication. And before we got there, we'd often overlap with a district nurse. And guess what? The district nurse was there to give John his medication as well, but she was giving him a different kind of medication. And I'm sure if we were tasked, or if Social Care Future was tasked with, how do we design supports that enable people to live well at home, we wouldn't design a separate reablement service funded differently to everything else. We wouldn't include social prescribing funded separately and accessed in a different way. We wouldn't have home care in the way that it's currently delivered, and that we wouldn't have separate district nursing. So here we've got some health services and some social care services that are all trying to do the same thing with the best will in the world, trying to enable people to live well at home and be part of their community. But the fact that we have to have people called system navigators, I think, is a great deal of shame for us. How have we designed a system that's so complex? We need to employ people to navigate the system for other people. So I think the opportunities are truly integrated health and social care, where there are neighbourhood teams whose role it is to support you to live well and be part of your community. And I think part of the challenge related to that is time and task commissioning of home care, which sets up all sorts of perverse incentives of carers, rushing out of one house to another as quickly as they can because they're not paid for travel time, or certainly that payment isn't passed on to them. And what I noticed with my mum is my mum's commissioned for 3 half-hour visits. and the visits last 20 minutes because they're trying to get as quickly as they can onto the next person, and they do the bare minimum, which is what's commissioned, of supporting mum with her medication and food. And mum got a phone call from a social prescriber saying, we're going to set you up with a befriender. And my mum is in a place in her later life where that's the last thing that she would tolerate. So because I see this from my mum, and I see this as working in home care, can we focus on relationships and love? Can we talk about love, as Rob says? Can we recruit people based on relationships and a relationship focus on well-being and not time and task? And that requires a fundamental shift to the way we use money in commissioning, and a fundamental shift in terms of how we work together. So my biggest challenge is loneliness.